Hello, everyone, and welcome to the U.S. Center. This event is Advancing Low Carbon and Climate Resilient Solutions in Cities. And now I'd like to welcome to the podium Gillian Caldwell, Chief Climate Officer at USAID. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Wow, that's some enthusiasm for the afternoon and the heat. Welcome, everybody, to the U.S. Center for today's event, Advancing Low Carbon and Climate Resilient Solutions in Cities. I'm not proud to say that this is actually USAID's first ever urban-related event at a COP. And the reason I'm not proud to say that is because cities constitute 75% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And needless to say, the amazing city leaders we're going to be hearing from today around the world will really demonstrate both the opportunity and the responsibility that lies with municipal and local governments. So I'm very excited about the event. You are going to be hearing today from our administrator, Samantha Power, who will be in conversation with a relatively brand new executive director of the Green Climate Fund, Mafalda Duarte, who is really fantastic, excited for her forthcoming leadership, as well as from the mayors I mentioned. But first, by way of offering some opening remarks, I'd like to introduce you to the co-host for today's event, the U.S. Department of Transportation. We have the Undersecretary of Transportation for Policy, Carlos Monje, and he'll be offering some opening remarks. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Deputy Administrator Caldwell, and thanks to Administrator Ambassador Power, Sam, and your amazing team for co-hosting this event with us, and everybody who's dialed in and here today. We are a critical moment for adapting our built environment to climate impacts, to mitigating our global greenhouse gas emissions, and working closely with the international community to meet our goals for a thriving, equitable, low-carbon global economy. The challenge we face is clear to us, and we are seeing the effects of climate change in our cities, on the housing, energy, and transportation systems that support them, and we're seeing growing climate impacts in the United States and abroad. In the U.S., as in many other countries, transportation is the leading source of greenhouse gas emissions, and that's why we at the Department of Transportation see ourselves as a critical part of the climate solution. We see clean vehicles, resilient and low-carbon transportation infrastructure, and compact, walkable, and bikeable cities as key to addressing both the impacts of the climate crisis as well as its root causes. We are at an historic moment, both in terms of the global call to address climate change and our ability to do so. The Biden administration is working hard to lead by example. With the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the Inflation Reduction Act, and the CHIPS Act, these have been some pretty substantial 2 years. This is an unprecedented investment in clean energy, transportation electrification, and smart growth. We've developed at the U.S. Department of Transportation in partnership with our interagency colleagues a decarbonization strategy for the transport sector. We aim to build a national transportation system through 3 strategies. First, the transportation system should support convenient and compact communities. Making communities more compact includes making sure we are building housing that makes it convenient for residents to access public transit, creating walkable, bikeable communities that are safe through transit-oriented development and zoning reform. And this avoids additional vehicle miles and greenhouse gas emissions, both from vehicles themselves and those embodied in the concrete and steel that make up our infrastructure. The U.S. DOT and the Department of Housing and Urban Development are investing heavily in these strategies. Second, we are working to make every mile traveled in our transportation system more efficient by supporting options in every transportation mode and increasing fuel economy. U.S. DOT is encouraging additional bus rapid transit and passenger rail to allow for more travel options within and between cities with less emission intensity. On the freight side, efficiency means moving to less carbon-intensive modes like maritime and rail, and in turn making those less carbon-intensive. This past summer, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration proposed new CAFE standards, which are a key part of our efficiency strategy. The proposed standards are going to require annual fuel efficiency increases of 2% for passenger cars, 4% for light trucks, and a whopping 10% for heavy-duty trucks, all of which are unprecedented improvements that are going to save consumers and businesses money and conserve energy and reduce greenhouse gases. Third, the third leg of the stool is supporting the transition to zero-emission transportation fuels and electrified vehicles. The bipartisan infrastructure law directed us and the Department of Energy to set up a joint office to deploy a network of electric vehicle chargers and alternative fuel infrastructure across the country, as well as zero-emission transit and school buses. And we made significant progress in rolling out these investments, including our NEVI program, which is providing $7.5 billion over 5 years to build out our EV charging infrastructure. The first chargers are actually going to be operational this month. The bipartisan infrastructure law also includes the carbon reduction program, which is one of the key ways that we and states and cities are working together to tackle the climate change by reducing emissions from transportation. That program is funded with $6.4 billion to help states develop a carbon reduction strategy. 48 states have already done so, and we're hounding the last 2 to get done. And just in the last month, USDOT announced new performance measures that are going to provide state departments of transportation as well as metropolitan planning organizations with a national framework and tools to track their transportation-related greenhouse emissions and to set targets that reduce. These are some of the ways that we're looking directly at state, city, and local governments to rise to the challenge of the moment. USDOT is providing tools, resources, and bilateral technical assistance around the globe through our Momentum initiative. And that's drawing from our work with international, state, local partners and stakeholders to share our learning on an array of issues. Back at home, we launched our first discretionary grant program of a program that's called Promoting Resilient Operations for Transformative and Efficient Cost-Saving Transportation, which is the names are always worse than the acronyms. It's PROTECT. It's the PROTECT program. It's $8.7 billion. It's really designed to make our system more resilient to rising sea levels, increasing temperatures, and improving lives for Americans. This is just some of the ways that we're working with our partner agencies, states, localities, and NGOs for a cleaner, stronger transportation system. We've got a lot of work to do. Really looking forward to this session. I'm very excited also to hear from the mayors, especially Madison, Wisconsin Mayor Rhodes Conway. We've had a couple events here, and she shared some of her experience, some of her challenges trying to transform her communities, access federal funds. Mayors are my favorite people, not just because Mayor Pete is my boss, but because they're impatient. You know, they are nonpartisan. They don't have the luxury of being partisan. They're willing to experiment, and they really know how things actually hit the ground. So thank you again for co-hosting this with us. It is my pleasure now to introduce Mark Watts, who is the Executive Director of C40 Cities, for the next panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Undersecretary, and I'd really like to express my thanks and appreciation to the Department of Transport and to USAID for hosting this event. Gillian, I feel very privileged if this is the first ever cities-focused event here, although I note that both USAID and the Department of Transport have worked very closely with C40 on a number of things and lots of other city organisations over many years. So I know it's not the first time the work has touched, even if we're privileged it's the first event. The subject of this session very much gets to the heart of the work of my organisation, C40, which is an organisation of just under 100 of the biggest, most influential cities in the world focused on climate change. And we see real progress. So 80 out of our 97 members have got in place already the Paris Agreement 1.5 degree compliant transition plans and are delivering them, what we want to see happening at every nation state. We've seen a trebling of the level of action to cut emissions and improve resilience that we map across our cities over the last decade, and yet it's not enough. It's not enough to be truly on track to our target of halving emissions across our cities this decade and making them resilient, particularly for the most vulnerable within those cities. And where we really see that the stress is in the rapid phase out of fossil fuels to enable those demand-led measures at a city level to work, but also increasingly now the flow of finance for climate adaptation and resilience. And we really see cities on the front line of those ever-increasing climate impacts, which is now starting to threaten the ability to constrain and reduce emissions as focus has to go on to protecting immediate livelihoods. So, to discuss those issues, and I'm sure many more, we have now got an incredibly high-powered and esteemed duo to come to the stage for a discussion here. First, if I can introduce them and come onto the stage as I call out their names, the USAID Administrator Samantha Power, and as we've just heard, the recently appointed Green Climate Fund Executive Director, Mafalda Duarte. Please welcome us to the stage. Now, I have a very ambitious set of questions in front of me, and I'm now looking at a clock that's in red counting down. So I'd say to both our panellists, don't hold back on your main points. Let's make sure we get those out as we go. But I guess to start us off, Administrator Power, it's really great that you're co-hosting this event. Just tell us the basics. Why focus on cities in your work?
Thank you so much, and thanks to you for all your leadership in making cities change agents. Thanks to you, Mafalda, for squeezing us in. This is kind of a big week for you, or big COP for you, and we're thrilled to see your leadership being brought to the GCF. We know it's a hugely important tool in the toolbox, and we at USAID are really excited to figure out how we work with countries so that they come to countries and communities so they are coming to you with bankable projects that look attractive to you to create a virtuous cycle. And thanks to my friend Carlos, and thanks to Mayor Pete, I often say about USAID that part of our job here is to make USAID a climate agency, because climate is touching and setting back so many of the development gains that have been made in recent years. I think what Mayor Pete, Carlos and the team are doing is also recognizing that you can't think about transportation public policy anymore without taking into account climate mitigation and adaptation as a design feature. And it's been thrilling to see the leadership that has been brought to bear. In brief, Gillian made the point already about 75% of the planet's emissions coming from cities. But it's worth even putting that in perspective. 2% of the land mass, 75% of the emissions. So if you're going to invest your time and you have limited resources, that's a really important locus of focus. Second, though, I would say that at USAID, since I was privileged to take over as administrator, we have more broadly made locally led development a cornerstone of our efforts. And you'd be surprised, and I won't go to the details, we don't have time, but to know just how little of USAID, how little of U.S. foreign assistance actually goes to local actors. And that's both cities and officials. We don't do a lot of government-to-government assistance anymore, period, also at the national level, but also local organizations, communities themselves who know best what they are grappling with and probably are in the best position to help us design, or for them to design and for us to support the solutions. So I think thinking about cities is part of a broader shift that needs to happen in the way assistance is deployed, that puts communities in the driver's seat. And then finally, just to come back actually to a point Carlos made at the very end, I just agree with the point that when you talk to mayors, we know the expression, or you may know the acronym GSD. Everybody know GSD? It's kind of, I'm not, as a mother, I shouldn't be really, anyway, get something done, get the mayoral like GSD index is a lot higher, and I say that as somebody who works in national government, than many public officials. There's just, as Carlos said, you either fix the pothole or you don't. You're accountable in a much more direct way to communities. And to me, that makes cities an incredibly important laboratory for innovation and iteration as we think about transportation, again, design in an entirely new way as we think about everything from air conditioners, to cars and sidewalks and greenery. I mean, if we can get it right in cities, we will get it right, or more right than we have up to this point. And in a nutshell, there's no way to achieve, just back to where I started and where you started, there's no way to achieve not only our climate ambition, but our climate necessities without cities being at the center of the effort.
No way to achieve the climate ambition without cities at the centre, and some of us just learnt a new acronym. Thank you.
What?
I mean, I've heard
But
the
you're
phrase,
famous for your GSD score is very high for one who wasn't familiar with the.
And I noticed the mayors were nodding.
Yeah.
So, Executive Director, same question for you as you're kind of mapping out what you want to achieve with Green Climate Fund. Why would you put cities at the centre of the climate work?
Thank you very much. First to say it's a pleasure to be here in the U.S. Pavilion. U.S. has been a champion and a great partner of the Green Climate Fund. And I need to note and thank U.S. government for the pledge that was announced just this week of $3 billion. That has made the difference between GCF having a replenishment that is above last 4 years, and substantially, and that will be important as we embark on the next 4 years with the new strategy. So thank you very much. Thank USAID and Department of Transportation, the hosts of the event, for choosing to invite us. Why are developing countries, and it's an honor to be with you, Administrator, in the same panel, our first. Why do we focus on cities? I think we already heard some of the points. Most people are in cities, most emissions, a lot of vulnerability in cities, in particular in developing countries. There's another piece of statistics that is always very, very important that I keep in mind, is that most of the urban land that will still be developed in developing countries is still to be built. So 60%. We will see massive investments in urban areas that are needed, these investments in infrastructure in developing countries, and we really need to make sure that this infrastructure is low carbon and climate resilient. GCF is the largest multilateral fund in support of developing countries to help them meet the ambition, their own ambition in terms of climate action, both on mitigation and adaptation, working with partners. Of course, we are there to unlock and enable much larger flows of investment. And we tend to focus on areas that are under-prioritized or have not yet received as much attention as others. And so cities is one of them. I think we need to see a lot more investments in cities. So it is one of a priority area for us. On the other hand, as part of our strategy, it's very clear that we also have to target the most vulnerable. It's one of the key objectives of our strategy, targeting the most vulnerable. And we know that there are large chunks of the population in developing countries in urban areas that are extremely vulnerable to climate impacts. So from both angles, this is an agenda that is really important to us. We were very happy to see in this COP that actually a local action, and I was listening in, as a matter of fact, to a panel that was mostly mayors, and them saying that, congratulating UAE for actually having a dedicated focus on subnational level action. And so we were also very happy to announce at this COP an initiative, a blended finance platform, first to actually mobilize institutional capital to lend long-term, to provide long-term debt to subnational governments. So we look forward to seeing that off the ground, moving speedily into action. So this is, in a nutshell, why this is so critical for us.
Great, thank you. And I think we're moving a bit there from the why cities to then the how you're looking to support an administrator power. If we could move on to that same question with you also. So you've said you see the development community now starting to focus a bit more on cities in terms of climate action, and certainly for your work. How do you think USAID is going to be focusing on cities and climate?
Well, again, for starters, all the work we do in other sectors, just as I was saying in the context of the Department of Transportation, our work in other sectors on economic growth, on governance and public financial management. Was just mentioned sort of responsible use of debt that doesn't leave you saddled, that doesn't leave future generations saddled for years as you try to make sensible investments in the here and now that ultimately will be in the interest of future generations. We have programming in all of these domains that is not explicitly climate mitigation or climate adaptation programming, but it is absolutely the necessary foundation to be able to take advantage, for example, of the kind of opportunities that we hope under Mafalda's leadership and that of her team that institutions like the GCF will make possible. Today, as it happens, funny you should ask, but today we are committing more than $53 million for new low-carbon and climate-resilient activities in more than 23 cities in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Caribbean. Again, this complements work that is underway, but it is going to be a more dedicated and concentrated kind of climate-specific effort. But again, if we only do that, that's a tiny amount of money given the needs in the city. We view that money as enabling and as catalytic, and in the interest of helping those cities do everything from thinking about building codes and decarbonization in a different way, to thinking about clean transportation and planning, releasing less methane, which people are finally coming to grips with just how much even more damaging methane is than CO2. So, again, in those cities, helping those cities, viewing ourselves as kind of enabling agents in support of the visions that those cities are themselves formulating.
Wonderful, and great to hear of the new fund there. And Executive Director Duarte, you've kind of teed this up a bit already, and how are you seeing Green Climate Fund now financing city climate action? You talked about this new blended finance program. Perhaps you can say a bit more about that and the other initiatives that you're taking.
So the interesting thing about the Green Climate Fund, and I'm relatively new and going through the learning curve, but some of the things that I find interesting is that it has quite a wide range of very relevant tools. So what is called in the readiness program. So we actually have a really large amount of resources that our board has just recently decided to allocate for building capacity of institutions, for helping them enhance their policies, their plans, and developing a pipeline of projects. So this is one tool. We also have quite a significant amount of project preparation resources, so we can also help provide dedicated resources for projects to help do the studies, feasibility studies, other analytical work that is necessary. And then, of course, we have the investment and our investment arm, and again, there with a lot of flexibility in terms of the financial instruments. So it's actually quite interesting to see the portfolio of GCF has a lot more equity investments and guarantee investments than I have seen in other funds. But we have the flexibility of providing grants as well, and even other financial instruments. So it's well equipped in terms of tools. We have been investing already in cities, and we have $1.7 billion of our own capital invested in a range of projects focusing on the decarbonization of the energy systems, energy efficiency, compact and more resilient urban development, and circular urban economy. Of course, we have to do a lot more, and as I said, I think we are quite committed to make this one of our priorities in the next 4 years. I'll just give you a couple of examples. One is a program that we have with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So we've provided them $275 million, and they are basically helping several cities with their capacity, the capacity at the institutional level, integration of policies, green procurement, and actually building that pipeline of investments. Another example with the World Bank, they have a large global cooling facility. We know how cooling is going to be a major driver of energy demand and GHG emissions. So again, we have put in that broader facility of almost $900 million, we've put $175 million. As I said, this new blended finance platform that we just announced at this COP, this is really targeted at subnational borrowers and basically trying to bring institutional capital to provide long-term debt. But another thing that we are doing, we aligned quite closely with the UNSG call on making sure that all countries have early warning systems, robust early warning systems by 2027. This is important also for cities and in terms of the resilience of the population. So we have already also made substantive commitments, but even this week as well, we announced doubling down on our efforts so that we really help close that gap and join other partners to close that gap. So these are just some of the examples of what we are already doing, what we are planning to do. But I really look forward to seeing, these innovative platforms. Just maybe one final one. We also announced this week support to a green guarantee company. This is basically to support guarantee climate issuance, issuance of climate bonds and loans. So again, another instrument that subnational entities might be able to use so they themselves, those that can. I know that not all can, but those that can issue debt, they can benefit from these guarantees.
Great, and I certainly know that that support for early warning systems will be very well received in the cities that we work with. And it perhaps sort of leads on to my next question, which is about some of the challenges here, and particularly around funding adaptation in cities. I know from C40's experience, we give equal weight to adaptation and mitigation, but 90% of the funding that we receive and are able to disperse is for mitigation. Which is not in remotely a reflection of the demand for support from cities, and that's true in terms of climate finance generally. Administrator, how do we change that? How do we get financial support for adaptation from public sources, but also from the private sector into cities?
Well, let me maybe just build on what Mafalda talked about, because I thought she did an excellent job laying out the kind of menu of offerings from the Green Climate Fund, but I think she and we in the room would be all quick to acknowledge that when you go out, and you must see this in the cities that you work with, you rarely hear, wow, the climate finance architecture is working brilliantly. It's just like an iPad, accessing resource. So simplification, debureaucratization, all of that, to be able to get access to that menu is so key. And we've been the co-chair of the board of the Green Climate Fund, working with Pakistan, other board members, and above all the leadership of the GCF to see steps in that direction. But I think what's so wonderful about these readiness funds, these project preparation funds, is that you put your finger on what we hear most from communities that they need. They need to be able to adapt. They see their public transportation mired in floods, or again the energy costs of keeping up with extreme heat, never mind the emissions costs. And they're crying out for help to adapt to the temperatures and the extreme weather events that are already upon them. But many, and the mayors will probably speak to this, don't know how to get from here to there, right? So I think our job as an agency that doesn't, unfortunately, have huge amounts of money ourselves to bring to this, because we're still divided in the United States more than we should be politically on these issues, even though so many American communities are themselves crying out for what amounts to they don't call it adaptation support, but that's what they're looking for. But to use our ground game, we have 13,000 people who work all around the world. We have full-fledged missions in 82 countries. 3/4 of our staff in these countries are nationals of the countries in which we work. They are Sierra Leoneans, for example. So how do we tap that network to support cities in being better able to access these large pools of finance? I think that is a comparative advantage that we and other development actors can have. And I think actually I was just in Maldives, which is not known for its cities per se, but I was in Male, and USAID made a front-end investment in an early warning system, and I just give a plug for it. By dramatically increasing the computational capabilities brought online, they were able to predict not only this amount of rainfall is coming to Male at this time, but next to this, it's as vivid as this, next to this school, the land will be submerged for 10 hours with 2 inches of rainwater. It'll recede at this time. It's an extraordinary level of prognostication. We seeded it, we invested it, we created proof of concept, and then the GCF came in over the top, now with real money to scale it, in that instance, to other islands, not to the cities of the size of those we'll be hearing about. But I think it's another example of us creating proof of concept and then putting cities and leaders and communities in the position to then go to the bigger resource opportunities to scale.
Great. So, Executive Director, if you would like to kind of add to what you've already said about how you're going to stimulate more funding around adaptation in cities, but as we note, the clock is ticking down in front of us. Perhaps you could also give us 10 seconds on what gives you hope, and then if we could leave a bit of time, I'll come back to Administrator Power with the same question.
But just to say that I fully agree with Administrator Power that we need to simplify access. I've said, I've been saying for some time, I've tried to emphasize this message during this COP. At the pace that we are going, if we keep going at this pace, we're not going to meet our climate goals. And we just have to think, if we continue to use the processes we have today, how long does it take us to deliver finance and results on the ground? And we pretty quickly see that we will not make it, because things that we invest today with the current processes will only deliver results in 10 years, 7 to 10 years. So we really need to reform. And that's our commitment. The next is commitment of our board. It's my personal commitment, my team's commitment. We will simplify, and we'll be asking our partners to help us. And part of that process will be listening from those that are on the receiving end, and keep listening and feeding that back, because we have to have fit for purpose processes. But when it comes to the subnational level and support to mayors and municipalities, I think we need to we need to respond to an integrated approach. And as you said, it's a lot more disproportionate support to mitigation efforts, or what's labeled to mitigation efforts, compared to resilience. I think we need to support integrated approaches, tackling both mitigation and resilience. Because I was seeing a mayor from Freetown saying those divisions are artificial. And therefore, I think it's really important to take that into account. What gives me hope? It gives me hope to see so many champions of climate here, but many more even that are not here, that are day by day, the youth, the local communities, leaders, local leaders, other leaders. That's always what gives me hope. That, if we stick together even more and we forge, strong partnerships, the clock is ticking. Unfortunately, the science says it's ticking faster and faster, which is a little bit counter. And so we really need to be laser focused on delivery, action, delivery, action.
Wonderful. And the clock has ticked, but Administrator Power, the one-sentence version, what's given you hope in this cities and climate sphere?
I'm incapable of one sentence, but I will do maybe two, which is 60% of people living in cities by 2030 will be under 18. And they're the reason this COP, young people are the reason this COP has the energy it has. They're the reason whatever progress we've made, and we know it's woefully insufficient, that's because young people have stepped up and said they deserve more. And the second thing that gives me hope briefly is, even though it's too slow, the private sector is showing more interest in adaptation, not merely as part of corporate social responsibility, which is part of just national responsibility and corporate social responsibility, but increasingly as part of their business model. But that has to accelerate more than just about anything, because we will not make up for lost times and the vulnerability of those young people and older people alike in those cities if it's just left to public sector finance alone.
Right. So we end on hope, as we always should. In a moment, I'm going to invite onto the stage Neil Kaur, Director of External Relations, Strategy, Knowledge and Innovation Division of UN Habitat. But first, let's give a huge round of applause to our fantastic speakers.
Thank you very much, Mark, for that wonderful introduction. And it was really lovely to hear from our panelists. My name is Neil Kaur, and I'm with UN Habitat. UN Habitat is the United Nations agency that is responsible for Sustainable Development Goal 11, which is sustainable cities and communities. And Minister Powers, thank you so much for the support from USAID. With your support, we are able to operate in Mozambique, where we are helping to build over 3,500 climate resilient schools from your support. UN Habitat is active in over 600 cities globally, and it is my immense privilege to invite on stage Mayor Yvonne Aki-Sawyerr of Freetown, Sierra Leone, and of course Mayor Satya Rhodes Conway from Wisconsin-Madison. You know, as Administrator Powers said, if you want to get something done, you need to go to the mayors. And my first question to both of you is on a topic on innovation. So can you both share with us one example of an innovation that you're able to implement in your city, and what were the challenges you faced? Over to you, Yvonne.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much, USAID, for having us here. I'm going to go with, just to emphasize that adaptation and mitigation distinctions are artificial, I'm going to go with one of our innovations that does both, and that is hashtag Freetown the Tree Town, in which we're planting and growing 1 million trees. And it's just so proud to say that we've been able to do this in fairly record time. We're at 977,000 as of today, and we have 23,000 to go. Confident that we will get there before the end of this year. Now, why is that both mitigation and adaptation? Mitigation because the carbon sink that we're producing, and our next phase now is to build sustainability by partnering with those who need carbon offsets so that they are investing in us planting more trees. 5 million trees is our target by 2030, whilst at the same time enabling us to monitor the trees. The reason I say plant and grow is because we actually individually tag each tree. There's a GPS coordinate, and we've created over 1,500 jobs for young people who actually monitor the growth of the trees. So they have an app on their phones, they upload the photographs, and they get paid based on progress. Co-benefits. Heat reduction. We're seeing severe stress, heat stress in the city. Our last 250,000 trees included trees planted in urban heat islands that we were able to identify through some heat mapping work we did in October of 2022. Slope stabilization. Because of the extreme weather patterns, we're suffering from landslides. Because of deforestation from people, or rural urban migration, we're suffering from landslides. So slope stabilization, water catchment protection. Water scarcity is a major consequence of the rising temperatures. So this also addresses that. Economic benefits, not just in terms of the jobs, but because 62% of the trees planted are economic trees, fruit trees or medicinal. And I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mayor's GSD. Well, I think building on the theme of co-benefits, I want to talk about a still relatively small program, which I hope has the opportunity to scale not just in Madison, Wisconsin, but across the state and the country and perhaps even the world. And that's our Efficiency Navigator program. And so this is a program where the city, using grant funding and I hope someday funding through the Inflation Reduction Act of the federal government, is working with landlords of naturally occurring affordable housing. So this is unsubsidized affordable housing. It is usually affordable by virtue of its age and condition, which means that it might not be the healthiest housing. And we are working with those landlords to go in and to assess and then retrofit these buildings for energy efficiency, for air sealing and insulation, for mold remediation, indoor air quality. We replace appliances. We will add solar if that's appropriate. And all of this is in favor of mitigation, obviously, but also improving health and comfort in these people's homes. And these are generally low or moderate income folks who are gaining the benefit of this work that we're doing. And as I say, it's a small program at this point, but we want to grow it. And one of the other hats that I wear is as chair of Climate Mayors. And it's the kind of thing that we do through Climate Mayors, is to share information with each other. Another way that Mayors GSD is by taking each other's programs and ideas and replicating them in our own places.
Thank you so much. And I think the GSD level has just gone up, by a few notches. Now, this morning we had the ministerial meeting with more than 60 ministers and 100 mayors attending. So we're really putting local government right front and center at the COP. And thank you so much for that support, mayors. Now, the one of the key issues with climate adaptation, climate finance is equitability. Yeah. So could you explain to us, what are your efforts in that direction, and what are some of the challenges that you're facing or the constraints that you're facing? How do we achieve equitable climate action?
Okay, thank you. So we put the vulnerable at the heart of what we do. So even in what I've just described, those trees are planted by community-based organizations, by young people and women. We have climate ambassadors. We have 13 catchment areas, some in our city, some just outside of our city. We're partnering with our neighbor. But you know something? I want to use this opportunity to raise an issue which is not the question you asked, and that is access to finance. We were incredibly fortunate with this particular program because there was a World Bank program underway, and we went up to them and said, what you're doing will never work unless we have resilience. We have a great idea. Can you fund this? And we're able to use a PPA drawn from that fund to do that. But we have other projects, and accessing finance, GCF. We came to you specifically for our transport solution. We have 80% of our population do not have vehicles. They use low occupancy, high polluting public transport, minivans, three-wheelers, two-wheelers. we came up with the idea from our residents of introducing a cable car. They had some help with the idea. A cable car like Medellin. It's taken us 3 years to access that, to access the funding for the feasibility study. Climate, C40 Cities Climate Facility came up with only $850,000. That's all we needed. We got the money from them. The only reason I believe we didn't get it from you is because of the access challenges. Having to go through national government is something I think you really need to look at, because it's not always that easy for city governments to be on the same page as national governments. And to make it a criteria means great innovations, great ideas with a political will, kind of get held back. So we just wanted to bring that onto the table. What was your question again?
Constraints, and you answered.
Yeah.
So I actually do want to build on that, because I feel like the constraints are similar in the U.S. context, but in our case, the constraint comes at the state level. We have a very wonderful federal government at the moment who is providing copious amounts of funding through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, and I am incredibly grateful to President Biden for the work that he's done there. But in the state of Wisconsin, our legislature preempts us from many, many things. We, for example, cannot control our building code, so we cannot have an impact on the future of the built environment in our community. And so the constraints that come from levels of government above cities are real. And so I think for all funders, and I say this to the federal government regularly, please bring the money directly to cities. And so for any funders in the room, I would say please bring the money directly to cities, because we are, as has already been said, we are closest to the people. We GSD, but we are also innovative. And as you've heard already, the solutions that happen in cities are multifactorial and have multiple benefits for our communities.
And we replicate across cities. So what we've done with Freetown, the Tree Town, we're now working on a project which is, imagine what's it called? Africa Tree Town. We want to plant 1 million trees across African cities that are C40 city members next year.
Wonderful.
That was like an applause moment.
Yes, applaud. Well, I have 2 minutes to conclude, and I'm only going to say that you only have to hear it from the mayors, yeah? And you can observe 3 things here. One, the GSD is there, right? It can really go up very, very high, but we really, really need multi-level cooperation. And of course, I'm from the United Nations and I work for member states. And after saying this, probably I have no job. But I really, really think, speaking very freely, we're in the US center. I think it's really very important to have that alignment between all levels of government, to really free the hands, to give the resources to the mayors to really raise the GSD level. Secondly, speaking on behalf of UN Habitat, it's very, very important to have adequate data. Without adequate data, we will not be able to convince the Jeff of the impact of our work. So, and this is really an appeal. We are the custodian of SDG 11. We just presented the synthesis report on SDG 11 at the HLPF in New York, and we only have data for 50% of the sub-indicators. So no one wants to invest in data, but it's really, really necessary. And thirdly, AI is with us. AI is here with us. We have guidelines that we're working with local governments to develop international guidelines for people-centered smart cities. And I would just like to stress, people-centered is crucial. It shouldn't be, as my executive director said, vendor-driven, right? So we should really be in aid of the work that we want to do collectively. So on that note, on that score, the conversation must continue, and I really, really hope that we will have stronger presence of local government, local voices in the next COP. Thank you very much.